What's up guys, this is Jan for Chess24. In this video we shall have a look at the encounter between world champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger in the last World Championship match, Sergei Karjakin. They met in the second round of the Sinquefield Cup 2017. Karjakin managed to win his first game against Peter Svidler, while Magnus Carlsen drew his game against Fabiano Caruana. There were some doubts about the form of both players going into this event. Karjakin had a very busy schedule promoting chess in Russia. He also just became a father for the second time. While Magnus Carlsen, a lot has been said about his lack of success, relatively, in classical events in 2017. He has not won a tournament for a while and even expressed doubts himself about his ability to win games in classical chess. He did, however, do very well in Rapid and Blitz in the Grand Chess Tour. So back to classical, and he goes for the move one knight to f3 against Karjakin. In the World Championship match, the players mainly discussed one e4 with some one d4 thrown in there as well. This time it's knight f3, and after knight to f6, g3 signals that Carlsen is looking for a game of chess. Of course, you can play the Reti with intentions of being very theoretical, but Carlsen himself said after the game that he was mainly just looking for a game and did not prepare all that hard for this one. After g3, Karjakin alternates between two systems. He likes to go d5 followed by e6 and bishop to e7, allowing white if he wants to transpose to the Catalan. But in this game he plays another system that he's used quite a bit. He goes for the move c5, and after bishop g2 he plays knight to c6, preparing to grab more space in the center with e5. Carlsen castles. You could make a case for d4 here, not as far as I know, after takes and e5. Black is kind of alright. So instead he does castle and allows e5. Here it's important to start with e5, not to go d5, because after d5, d4, white can transpose to Grunfeld the tempo up. Even though not everything is clear here, this is a line that most players prefer to avoid with the black pieces. So after e5, now Karjakin is threatening is a bit strong, but hinting at ideas of occupying the whole center. Going d5, playing a reversed King's Indian. And Carlsen says, not so fast, let me get a bit of central control as well. Plays the move e2 to e4. A move that Karjakin has faced many a time, so none of this is a surprise for him. The main point is that you can't really take the pawn after knight takes e4. Even knight takes e5 recaptures it with a good position. So what black should be thinking about is not pawn grabbing, but how to develop. This bishop can either go to e7 or to g7. The pawn should probably go to d6. Opening the center with d5 is too risky. And Karjakin starts with d6. After d3 he decides to fianchetto his bishop. He has some experience putting his bishop on e7 in the structure as well. g6. Carlsen plays the move a3, which looks innocuous, is still following the footsteps of the great theoretician Vladimir Kramnik, though, who played it against Anish Giri. But generally a3 signals that, Carlsen wants to play a game of chess, no direct contact between the two forces. After bishop g7, he plays a move c3. Typical King's Indian stuff, preparing to expand with b2 to b4. Karjakin castles, and after b4 he plays a move which I found quite instructive. Maybe it's obvious, to me it wasn't that obvious. The move a6, just stopping any expansion with b5, saying I'm completely fine with this structure after b takes c5, dc5, but I don't want you to go b5. Actually, I want to play b5 myself, grab a bit of space on the queen side. Knight bd2, Karjakin plays b5. I like the setup, looks very playable for black to me, who has to decide what to do next. Carlsen plays rook to b1, and Karjakin immediately embarks on an unexpected journey, trying to bring his knight all the way to a4, long way away from home. He goes for the move knight to d7. You could also make a case for the move bishop to e6, preparing knight d7, so this bishop is already developed, without fearing knight g5, then bishop g4. Looks quite reasonable for black to me. But Karjakin goes for this directly, and Carlsen says, you know what? I don't really want you to bring your knight here without being bothered, so I will go knight to b3, which means that after knight b6, your pawn on c5 would be hanging. This is not really the end of the story. Black could still go knight to b6, and after b takes c5, play knight to a4 with a double attack against these two. But Karjakin, maybe fearing something like c takes d6 here, decides not to go for such complications and instead keep it simple, take on b4 before moving the knight. Which is a small positional concession because black captures away from the center while white recaptures towards the center, which in theory increases the central control. The pawn on c3, a bit more useful than the pawn on a6. But having said all that, nothing grave has happened yet really. Black, for example, could even simplify further here by playing the move a6 to a5, exchanging the pawn on b4, and after, let's say, takes. I don't think black is in any real danger. Karjakin instead sticks to his plan, goes knight to b6. Now both sides mobilize their forces for a while. Complete development. Bishop e3, bishop e6, queen d2, rook c8, rook fc1, rook e8. All the pieces are developed, so Carlsen says, you know what, I don't really have any particular breaks that I'm fond of. I'll just hurry the h-pawn, see how far that gets me. h5, not really a threat, but it's a bit of a nuisance. It's never that comfortable. Even though we'll see it in a minute, for black to go h5 here, because it gives white access to the g5 square. Well, black doesn't really have a knight that could access the g4 square. Instead, after h4, Karjakin plays knight to a4. This knight finally arrives at its destination. And to my surprise, Carlsen does not continue, for example, pushing the h-pawn, but instead decides, now that this knight has abandoned its post on b6, it no longer controls the c4 square, so I might as well push my c-pawn, opening a second front on the queen side and potentially opening the c-file. White's logic is probably that he carries the key to when the queen side gets open, because black never really wants to take here, just ruining his structure. Therefore, white can decide if he ever wants to take on b5 or go c5. Still, nothing's free. c4 loses control over the d4 square, which is a factor we'll see later in the game. Karjakin now goes h5, doesn't really want to think about h4, h5 anymore. King h2, bit of a waiting move, and bishop g4. Also anticipating knight to g5 at the same time, hinting at ideas to fight for the d4 square. Carlsen sees nothing better than forcing the issue here with c takes b5. There were other moves like knight g5 is very much an option, but Carlsen goes for more hostilities on the queen side, goes cb, ab, and knight to a5. Maybe he was jealous of Karjakin's knight being parked so nicely on the rim of the board. He thought, I want my own knight covered by my pawn on the a file. Goes knight a5. Of course, black should not take here, because after knight a5, ba5, all of a sudden the a pawn is a force to be reckoned with, while the b pawn is weak. Instead, knight a5 allows the black knight to jump into the center, and that is what Karjakin does. Of course, double-edged, you're slightly ruining your pawn structure after an eventual knight takes d4. Then again, the pawn from d4 will also control the c3 square, giving this knight a new home. So, a lot of difficult strategic decision, pros and cons, all that good stuff. For now, Carlsen decides this rook doesn't really have anything to do, so let me exchange one pair of rooks, put the other rook on the c file. See where that gets us. Queen to d7. Now this horsey has to be captured. Knight takes d4, e takes d. And bishop to h6. A good move, because it turns out this bishop is actually quite important. At first sight, it looks like black should just play knight to c3. Stop this rook from seeing any daylight. But after takes, f3 and queen f2, it turns out that without its defender on g7, the d4 pawn would just drop. Black would be in serious trouble. Therefore, not going to be able to do it, and Karjakin correctly decides to keep this bishop on the board to cover the d4 pawn, also his king. Goes bishop h8. Carlsen now goes rook to c6 before this door gets closed forever, trying to activate his rook, but the white construction, while active, does look a little goofy with the rook on a5 covering the rook on c6, the bishop on h6. His pieces are a bit all over the place. They do have a lot of dynamic potential though. This might be the place where Karjakin really goes wrong. He plays the most natural move in the position to move knight to c3, but after that the looming potential of the white pieces gets unleashed move by move. What he should have done is bother this construction immediately. Rook a8, rook c8 was also possible. I like rook a8, threatening rook takes a5 and not giving white a breather. When my computer says lines like queen to c1, knight to c3, rook to b6 are likely to happen with equality after rook b6, rook c8, the black pieces are quite harmoniously placed as well. Instead, Karjakin goes for the immediate knight c3. Looks fine as well, but now all of white's moves start coming with tempo. f3, push the bishop back. Bishop to f4, targets the pawn on d6. Black doesn't really have a choice, but going bishop to e5, finally agreeing to the exchange of these dark squared bishops. But even though this exchange helps the black structure, gets rid of his double pawns, it does weaken his king, which is a grave factor. And Carlsen immediately opens the position further, plays f4, introducing ideas of f5 to expose his king, who no longer has his trusted companion by his side. This is a tough position to play, especially with time trouble looming. Karjakin goes for the move queen to e7, threatens the pawn on b4, but Carlsen parries that very easily with rook to c5, which at the same time keeps an eye on the e5 pawn. Here, probably the best black could do was to take on f4, but after queen takes f4, the position remains unpleasant just because the white pieces are much more active than their black counterparts. Knight on c3 looks nice, but it can't really do all that much for defending his own king, so it's not a pleasant position to have. Instead, Karjakin goes for the move rook to c8, going for some tactics, trying to expose this b4 pawn, create his own passed pawn, but turns out that the main factor in the position is still the good old king. And after takes, white finally brings his knight back from the edge of the board into the thick of things on e5. After queen takes b4, material is still equal. Looks like black has a dangerous passed pawn, but f5 shows that the main action is still over here. And all of a sudden, black has to think about queen g5, queen h6, queen f4. There's too many problems to solve. He goes for queen to d6. One sample line that I liked, it's not really relevant, but it's queen e7, queen to f4, knight to e2, trying to undermine this construction, and the Zwischenzug f5 to f6. The point being, after knight f4, f e7, this pawn sort of queens, therefore black is in deep trouble. Queen e6, queen g5. With this king, he would not survive. Instead, queen d6 was played, knight to f3, taking his time, preparing to also push this pawn, while still intending to activate the queen. And Karjakin decides he has to do something about the f-pawn, get rid of it, even at the price of exposing his own king. You might think, and I thought that when I first saw this position, that looks like a bit of an overreaction and he should have pushed his b-pawn instead with counterplay. But turns out he's just not in time to defend. For example, b4, queen to g5, b3, f takes g, e5. The white attack doesn't look that dangerous, but it's just slowly but surely breaking through. Queen b6, queen e7, b2, no stopping the b-pawn, but does not matter, because after knight to g5, the king is the guy in trouble. b1, queen f7, and checkmate would ensue. So hard to criticize Karjakin for his decision to go gf5, but it leaves his position in dire straits as well. Check king h7. Here every move is strong. ef5 is the computer's favorite. Queen h5 is good, but Carlsen's choice is also not really to be criticized, because after e5 his position remains completely dominant. He wants to establish control over the dark squares. Queen to d8, knight to g5, pick up this pawn, and wrap up the game. That is pretty much what happens. After queen takes d4, the material is still equal, but the difference in king safety, pawn structure, and piece activity is not, especially if we compare the two queens. The black queen hardly has a square or a way to influence the game, while the white queen reigns from the center of the board. And therefore, not too surprisingly, this game is over right here after knight to a4. Carlsen finds one more nice move. Not an obvious move to me. I was quite impressed with this move. That kills black's last hope. The move knight to a3, which is an odd move because his knight is so pretty on g5. But turns out it's even prettier on f4, stopping any counterplay connected to f5, f4. Just making it impossible for black to even make moves. Like, try for yourself. Whatever, king to g8, knight to f4, queen to g4, let's say, queen to b4. There's just nothing black can do. Well, white has infinite ways to improve his position. It is hopeless, and therefore Karjakin, after knight h3, decided to throw the towel. The players also made it past the time control here, so Karjakin had enough time to weigh his options, and he decided further resistance was futile. Is it futile or fertile? I always mix up the two, which I think is a dangerous thing to do, because they mean different things. Let's look at what happened, I believe, right after resignation. Here we are, handshake, the king gets centralized, white king on e4, black on d5, means victory, and the players disappear from the board. All video footage is courtesy of the Grand Chess Tour that were nice enough to allow me to use this footage, and you've seen Carlsen's look there. 1 down, 7 to go. 2 down actually, but 1 victory. Looks like the world champion is in good shape so far in the Sinquefield Cup. He also defeated Karjakin in Norway Chess, a tournament that did not go well for him. So as he said himself, he's going to have to do better against the rest of the field. But it looks like in their post-World Championship match encounters, Carlsen has the upper hand against Karjakin, up 2.5 since the match. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.